Thank you very much. I'm thrilled to take you on this 3D online curatorial tour. You have the chance to see a bit of the work, a bit of the show. To all of you who can't be here, I think this is great. So I'm glad that I can show you a little bit of what we managed to put together here. Also, I'd like to say that I really appreciate all the work of the Apex Art team. So especially Elizabeth, Ryan, Maya, Lisa, and Steven for the opportunity and for helping me put all of this together, and just for being great as you are. So thank you. I also want to thank the 12 artists that without whom this show wouldn't even be possible, of course, not only because of their works that are here on display, but also because of each and every conversation I got to have with them throughout the process, this 1 year process of thinking about the show and making it happen. Also because they helped me understand a bit more about myself, about where I come from, and about ourselves. So I think this has been great. Huge thanks to Lorena Vilela, Isabella Vilela, and Ligia Rodrigues, my dear friends and collaborators who helped me put this together as well, in every aspect of production, architecture, and emotional support as well, and their friendship. Special thanks to Agência Galo, to Acervo Sesc de Arte, Coleção Museu de Arte Moderna de São Paulo, do MAN, São Paulo, Gomide, Vandal Art, and Victor. And of course to my family, to my friends, and especially to my partner, Paula. About the show, what I want to say, first question I always get is where does the show come from? And I like to say that the show is actually, the idea of the show is actually contingent to Apex Art and to the open call, in the sense that it was actually conceived for this specific place and for this specific time. So when I wrote the proposal, the question I had in mind was, okay, so what I would like to, that people in New York, the city, with which I have a very strong connection because I lived here, because I love being here. So what do I want people in New York to hear? What would I like them to know about not only me, of course, but about what I have to say? And this is when the idea of the show came in mind. So there are sources that say that there's 100,000 Brazilians living in New York, and I'm sure this number is way greater than that. We know there's a lot of undocumented people here, so I'm sure there's much more than this number. And if we assume that half of it's women that are living here, Brazilian women that are living here, I would love to be able to communicate with those women as well, who are living here, who are struggling with the fact that they're Brazilians and living abroad. So I think I had all of this in mind. And of course, this show, the idea of the show comes and stems from my own experience as a Brazilian woman who's traveled a bit and who's seen and heard things. And what I think is very interesting as well is that the more I talk about this topic of the stereotype commonly used to think of Brazilian women, the more I talk about it with friends, with Brazilian friends and people that reached out to me after we started talking about the exhibition. So the more I talk to them, the more I hear stories, very, very absurd stories, terrible stories. And I see that many people, regardless of where they're living right now and their stories, they relate to this stereotype that's constantly projected upon us. So I think this is pretty much where it comes from. So it's a fact that there's a cliche that expects Brazilian women to look and to behave a certain way. I think this is obvious, and we can see how many people are affected by it. We can trace this back to colonization, to the enslavement period, even to the misrepresentation common in Carnival, which is a great party, but sometimes very very restricted, people commonly think about it only in terms of half-naked women. And there's that too, yes, there's that, but it's much more than that. It's cultural, it's a lot more than that. So we can even think about infamous trip that Arnold Schwarzenegger had in Brazil. Just there's videos showing that moment. So we can talk about how Bolsonaro and his government attacks women and marginalized groups on many, many different levels. But what I really wanted to talk about today is not about the origins of the stereotype, but rather about how Brazilian women are diverse and how we can overflow this cliche by creating art. So I take these 12 women here. I see some of them are online with us, and I'm really happy to see their faces here. And I want to take this opportunity to value this, to value the fact that we're doing stuff that actually surpasses this cliche. For some of you who might be familiar with literature, you'll know that many thinkers have claimed that the death of the author, and in very brief words, I don't want to talk too much about this. It means basically that the artwork surpasses, supersedes the author. And although I agree with that to a certain extent, this show is somewhat the opposite of this, in the sense that it really values the biography of each artist, and it extrapolates precisely this, their own experiences to address this intrinsic concern of being a Brazilian woman and what it means today. So every work here that you'll be able to see in this gallery is heavily informed by the fact that these artists are Brazilian women. As I mentioned yesterday in the preview, this show can be seen as a show about a particular identity, that is of Brazilian women, but it's much more than that. So I think we have here multiple stories, and they unfold as you start connecting one to the other. It gets way more interesting when you start making these connections. And although we cannot represent each and every woman in Brazil, the millions of women, I think we have many stories here, and they can start intertwining and telling all their stories in a very surprising way. Hopefully today in this tour, we'll get to talk a little bit about this. So maybe we could start the 3D virtual tour. Ryan will share the screen, and you'll be able to start seeing a little bit of what we've done. So this work is Brazil by Santa Rosa Barreto. The starting point of this work for Santa Rosa was precisely a moment when she was living abroad. She was in France, and she was faced by this constant assumption about Brazilian women that we're talking here today, the stereotype that eroticizes and objectifies Brazilian women. So this neon light, this pink neon light in Brazil is heavily seen in brothel areas. It's connected to sex, and this luxurious pink is all connected to this, to everything that takes us back to this stereotype. This reinforces the stereotype in a very sarcastic way. So, of course, this work inspired the title of the show, Oh, I Love Brazilian Women. And this is a provocative title, and sometimes it takes people a while to understand the irony of it, that they're not going to find pictures of half-naked Brazilian women on the beach here in this gallery. So I think it has this provocative way of asking people to check what we're talking about here. So maybe we can move to next work. I love that. So this is Our Bodies Ourselves by artist Juliana Manada, who lives in London. And she was really shocked. She actually created this work for the exhibition, and she was inspired by her shock when she found out that 4 out of 5 Brazilian women living in London had already faced some kind of gender violence. It stands out like a very high number, especially for someone who's living in London. So she was shocked by it. And this is when she created this work as a response to that. She created 1,500 portraits. So the image you see there, it's actually 1,500 different images, portraits of women that are naked, half naked. You cannot see their bodies exactly, because this is not what the work is about. I think the word is about this clear message that this phrase, this affirmation that there says, our bodies ourselves. So it's basically saying it doesn't matter how we're dressed, how we behave, our bodies ourselves, we own our bodies, and you cannot go further the limit that I'm imposing. So I think the message couldn't be clearer. It talks directly to what we're discussing here. And speaking of an artist that lives abroad, we also have Juni Canedo de Souza. She's an artist who lives here in New York for a long time now. So her work is a video performance that Ryan will be playing, so we can watch a little bit. So this video performance was actually recorded here in New York, and the artist keeps running in circles for 1 hour. The whole video has 1 hour, and she keeps running in circles in this hole that she dug. And I think this work speaks to the fact that sometimes as Brazilian women, we feel very tired. We feel very exhausted of many, many things. And I can only think of how someone who's been living here for quite some time, but still is a Brazilian woman, can feel in terms of her experience as an artist and as an expat, as a woman in the world. So I think this action mimics this exhaustion of fighting for everything that we have to fight. I also think that it relates very much to the moment we're living right now, we're currently living, in which we feel like running around in circles and struggling a lot, and we don't even know if the actions we're trying to take will actually result in something real or purposeful. So this whole exhibition tries to be very optimistic about what we've been doing right now, but I think this work talks a little bit about this place of doubt, if we're actually going somewhere or not. I'd like to see the posters now, the Leonardo Dabao's posters, because I find very interesting actually how many of the artists here are somehow drawn to New York City. So June's work was recorded here, but Leonardo Dabao's work, Leonardo is a Brazilian artist based in São Paulo, and this work somehow relates to New York City as well. And this is something I only found out throughout the many conversations I had with the artist during the process of putting this show together. So Leonora was actually writing for a newspaper in 2001 when the Twin Towers were attacked. And that's what inspired her to shoot these self-portraits of herself using different clothes and wigs, because she was thinking about the terrorist hunt that was happening that time here in the US. And this was 2001, right? So in 2002, she took these pictures, the poster that she created, and she did a performance in Curitiba, another city in Brazil, in which she showed the posters to people around on the streets, and she was asking if they had seen that woman in the posters. Of course, the woman was herself, but many people wouldn't recognize. So this performance can be seen as the search for the self-identity and for this validation, very common, in which we reach out to the external gaze of someone to come into terms to who we are. So I think this is much more meaningful when we're talking about women, because we're constantly having to prove ourselves and to prove that we are capable and to prove that we are not just a stereotype that has been going on for a while. Since we're talking about self-identity and this search for something else, I'd like to talk about Micaela Cirino's work, Cura. Micaela is an artist who's HIV positive, and much of her work address this this stance, this something that's part of her, and this inspires her work very much. So this performance, Cura, was actually recorded in Quito, Ecuador, and it shows the artist on a public square, alternating moments of cleaning herself and drawing words on her own skin, and then she cleans them in this sort of repetitive movement. This is the video we're seeing right now. The work is very informed by the stigma that society projects onto HIV positive people. And I think what's even more striking about this is that not only HIV positive people have to deal with prejudice in general, but also in Brazil, the Black community is the community that dies the most from AIDS. So this shows to us that public health policies are biased towards genocide and of Black people and the whitening of the population, which I think is very serious. So this work comes as it comes as a denounce as well. It's very strong to me. And since we're talking about virus, 40 years after the start of the HIV epidemic, we're again facing something that scares us and that has forced us to change habits. Of course, coronavirus is different. It's not the same thing as HIV, we know, but it still is a virus that attacks people, and it impacts different people in much different ways. It's interesting to see how some people still suffer more than others, namely people in poor countries, in marginalized countries and areas that still have no access to vaccination, for instance. Besides that, in Brazil, we have a specific issue that came with coronavirus, which is the fact that even at home, where we had to stay in order to protect us from the virus, women were attacked and were facing even more violence and gender violence and rape, these kinds of situation during the isolation period of the virus, of the pandemic. So the place that was supposed to guarantee safety to us sometimes actually puts us in danger. This is what Camila D'Annunziata's work is about. The two shoes tied by the chains, in which we can read fica em casa, which in English would be stay home. This phrase that we heard a lot in the past 2 years or so. So it talks about the violence that we face, not only outside on the streets, but also inside our home, of abusive relationships and gender violence. And because we're talking about virus, I would like to talk about Victoria Cribb's work right now. This is an installation that was, it's the first time we actually, this was installed outside the internet. Victoria Cribb works a lot with digital media, and This is an installation about Melissa virus, which was a microvirus that attacked computers back in the 1990s. So it was basically an email that people received. And back then, of course, people who were the majority that had access to emails, that used emails, it was white privileged men who received an email from a woman called Melissa that wrote a very provocative message asking them to open the file but not to show anyone. And then it was actually a virus. So it was those men were very easily targeted just by pretending it was a sexy woman writing them. So I find interesting that this seemed to trace back to Pandora, to Eva, to Eve, right? In English, we say Eve. Women that bear all the evil in the world. So even the virus had to be a woman. And this strikes to me as a repetition of something. And we can see the installation, the different plates. Okay. After that, we have Brenda Nicole's work, Volume 7. This is a painting that shows a figure, a person dancing to music with some obscene lyrics on the background and lots of different elements. This makes me think immediately of funk, Brazilian funk music, very famous genre of music in Brazil, and all the questions raised by this. So finally, during the process of publicizing this show, many responses I saw on Instagram posts was regarding, or were actually blaming women for the fact that we were objectified. Many people said, oh, it's no wonder Brazilian women are seen like that. Did you see how Anitta behaved? Did you see how women are in soap operas? So it's exactly the opposite for me. So what these people are doing, again, they're blaming Brazilian women for the stereotype that was projected onto them. So does the fact that a woman is showing her body, does this allow someone to attack them, to be violent to them? I don't think so, right? So I think this speaks to Carnival again, something that I talked about in the beginning of the tour. And it talks about many of our cultural expressions and how women might feel free to show off their bodies. And we would love to arrive to a place where we could do it without the fear of being violated or being attacked. And similarly, to go to the next work, similarly, trans women are also attacked and they're also objectified. This is Benedita Arcoverde's video performance, Cadê Minhas Irmãs, which we'll get to watch a little bit now. In this performance, Benedita has many, she has papers glued in which we can read Cadê Minhas Irmãs? In English, it's where are my sisters? And this is a response to the fact that Brazil is one of the countries where transgender people, with the highest rates of killing of transgender people. So she's asking, where are my sisters? They were killed, they were murdered by the fact that they are trans people. And she takes off the papers and then she has this red painting on her body, which she'll remove in reverse. So it's very touching video. one of the other information that's interesting about transgender people is that aside from being killed in Brazil a lot, they're also, people are very interested in pornography involving transgender. So it shows to me that objectification and violence are really closely connected. This is a work then that addresses the genocide of trans people. Next, we can talk about Fernanda Sternieri tapestry called Alfabeto Selvático. Oh, sorry, Alfabeto Cibernético, which is part of a series called Alfabeto Selvático, in which she explored how we communicated before a language existed, which takes us to a time before objectification as well. The objectification of women, for instance. This is tapestry, of course, is traditionally linked to a feminine practice, although this stance that Fernanda took is very contemporary, and this specific work is about how we communicate on the internet, how we communicate online, and I find it especially interesting because it looks like we're using less and less words to communicate, but still we get to attack more and more people online. Which can take us now to Milena Paulina's work, Ogerito. Is a photograph series. It's actually part of a series of photos that the artist shot of fat women, of women that challenge the beauty patterns that were commonly that we commonly face here in Brazil. So this is just one of the series that Milena has. She constantly uses her Instagram to post the pictures, and she's constantly censored there as well for showing women's bodies. So this, I think this picture actually talks about all the patterns, the beauty patterns that we're not seeing on the cover of magazines. In a certain way, the internet is more democratic in the sense that it allows us to see different things than what we see on the magazines, but it appears that internet is also willing to censor things that they don't want us to see. And this is what happens to Milena Paulina. And then last but not least, we have Adisana Patasha's work. It's composed of 3 different images. Adisana Patasha is an indigenous woman from the Patasha, and this work is very, I think it's very straightforward. She took 3 images, 3 photos of indigenous people, and she erased them and whitened them, just like happened in Brazil during the colonization period, the obliteration of indigenous people, the rape of many indigenous women, and the whitening of the population. So this was a digital work that Adisana developed during the COVID pandemic, and this was made to be printed and displayed like this on the wall. And I wanted actually to finish with this work because I said in the beginning that we were not going to discuss here necessarily the origins or where did this stereotype came from, or the reasons why, but I think that this specific thing that happened to the indigenous people is where it started, ultimately. So the whole idea of the show is to actually help to be a step, even if a small step, in the direction of not letting this happen anymore, any of this. So I feel like putting all of these 12 works here together today for people to see online or in person can help, even if a little bit, for us to be aware of how this type of stereotype, how this objectification of women can be harmful and lead to violence and to murder and to actually being very, very bad for many people. So this is some of the things that I would like to talk about today. And so feel free to ask whatever you want if you have questions or comments or things that you would like to talk about. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Luiza. This is so beautiful and really meaningful to hear you talk a little bit more about the works. I've been lucky enough to be working at Apex and watching as the show comes into being, but it was really special to be able to hear a little bit more about all of the works that are there. I just want to let everybody know that you can go onto the website, the main exhibition website, at apexart.org, and also you can go directly to the exhibition page in the chat there, and you can watch the full videos. So there's if you really want to investigate further some of those works, please go there and check out the videos. And also we were watching June Canedo de Souza's beautiful performance piece where she was walking and running in the circle in that dirt space, and she's going to be doing a performance, which will be a hybrid event at Apex and also online. And Luiza, I thought I would maybe invite you to tell people a little bit about the performance events that are going to be upcoming. We have 3 events for the exhibition, and I would love for people to hear a little bit more about them because I think they are really special events.
Okay, yeah, sure. So on the 29th of January, we'll have a roundtable with the artists, the 12 artists. Maybe some of them won't be able to join, but we're trying to have all of those who can attend to talk a little bit about their works and how they're related, to hear from their perspective on the works. And we'll also have Isabela Guimarães Del Monde, who's an attorney specialized in gender violence. So we're hoping to have her perspective on some of the topics that I touched upon today. On the 5th of February, we'll have another event called Brazilian Authors Intertwined, in which 2 actresses, Brazilian actresses living in New York, will be here at Apex Art, reading texts by Carolina Maria de Jesus and Hilda Hilsch, 2 Brazilian authors. And we'll be glad to be intertwining these 2 very different authors and seeing what they have in common and seeing what they don't. So to talk a little bit about racism as well, something that's very present in the show, the topic of racism and transphobia. So in this specific event, we'll talk more about racism. And then on the 5th of March, we'll have Juni Canedo, as Maya mentioned, have a performance. She'll talk a little bit about her work, and she will have a performance by her as well. So really excited and looking forward to seeing all of the events.
Yeah, so please go you can actually on the in the chat there are some links that you can click on and register now, or you can also go to the website and register. I know that we don't have June's event up yet, but that'll come up soon. So if you want to just follow Apex Art on all of our different platforms, you can keep an eye on that and see it when it first comes up. I want people to just ask questions in the chat, and maybe if anyone has any thoughts or questions, and while we're waiting for maybe some folks to put some in, I had a couple questions for you. One thing I'm really curious about is, I know this has been, such a time, and you submitted your proposal to the Apex Arts open call before the pandemic, is that right?
No, it was actually during the pandemic.
It was during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Okay. Because yeah, some of our exhibitions have been, moving around due to when
Yeah.
we can have them. But I'm just really curious. This has been such a challenging political moment in Brazil, with the election of such a right-wing leader, and a difficult everything that comes along with that, and then also the pandemic on top of this. So I'm just wondering how the sort of the context that you were seeing, how this really influenced your desire to put this show together in the way that you did.
Yeah, exactly. It influenced a lot the whole situation we're living in Brazil right now. So my intention was actually to create a more positive, not naively positive, but a more positive show, to have a proposal to talk about good things that are happening. So if we do have this stereotype, and I really think we do, how can we challenge it? Not just saying it exists, but actually saying, look here how it doesn't make sense, because we have all of these women doing all of these things, challenging the political situation in Brazil, the social situation in Brazil. So I think this was very much, this informed a lot how I decided to write my proposal. Yes.
Yeah. Well, it definitely shows that. And just jumping off from that, how did you go about finding the artists? Like when you were looking for artists to be in the show, what were some of the aspects? You were talking about a more positive sort of approach to this topic, but just I would love to hear a little bit more about your thinking around the curation. Like what was it that you were looking for when you were seeking artists to
Yeah,
put together to speak to each other?
of course. Yeah. So I wanted to bring artists that could tell different stories than my own story, from what I'm seeing. So it was very important to me. And I've always said that to the artists when I invited them to participate. I said, I don't want this to be a show, my show. I want this to be our show. So I want to talk to you about it. I want to understand what your work's about and how it will be connecting to the other works. This is when I found out, for instance, that Leonardo work was actually a response to the attacks here in New York, which was very interesting. I got to talk a lot to Fernanda Sternieri, who's here with us today, and she was explaining to me where her inspirations came from. So what I wanted was to bring women with different stories to help me tell the story of this show, to help me tell that. So they come from different areas of Brazil. I wanted to bring women who were living abroad as well. I thought this was interesting, an interesting perspective, and women coming from different backgrounds for different realities. And as I said, and I can't stress that enough, because it's something we have to deal with, is the fact that we cannot represent all women. Unfortunately, it wouldn't be possible. I don't know the size of the show for this to be possible, but I think we've tried to encompass many realities here, and I think we did.
Yeah, definitely. It's very broad in what the artists are presenting. My one last question for you is, it's not that this exhibition is being presented in New York, so it's not in Brazil. But as you said, there are so many Brazilians who live in New York City. Some of the programs are going to be in Portuguese as well, and we also now have this online ability, so people can access the work from afar. So when you were thinking about your audience, who were you thinking about? And were you thinking that it as a show for a foreign audience, like New York public, or was part of your audience like actually Brazilian women themselves? And how did you sort of think about those different audiences?
I think both. So people in New York who are not Brazilian, so they could understand. I wanted to talk a little bit about our reality. So the show is not just about the stereotype, as I said. The idea is to challenge the stereotype, showing that we're doing much more, and we are much more. So I wanted them to see that. But I would love to see Brazilian women living in New York or visiting New York visit the exhibition as well, because I would love to make them feel represented somehow. I know that Many times immigrants, they don't feel at home, they don't feel represented to things that they see on the streets, on television. So I would love them to come and see how we're thinking about them, and how we're, together and trying to challenge all the struggles that they face too.
Yeah, I think that's really shows in the works you present. So thank you so much, Luiza. Thank you for telling us about the show. It's been wonderful working with you on putting this together. And thank you everybody for joining us today. This video will be up online in a couple of days so that you can watch it again. You can share it with your friends. And I encourage everybody.
Can we ask questions?
Oh, sure. You want to unmute now? Go for it. Yeah.
Just a quick one. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. And just I want to say it's like great what you pulled off here. It's amazing. It was very interesting, especially for me as a guy. Like you don't even like realize if you're like a dude what women face nowadays, like in a day-to-day basis, or also especially if you go out on like weekends, especially you as Brazilians. And yeah, it was really great and interesting. And or what I want to ask, or like it's more a practical one, not so much regarding to your art, but have you like, I don't know, what's your strategy? Like if a random guy comes up to you on a nightclub or on a pub on a day-to-day basis, and you're just on the streets, like how do you approach all these stereotypes when like a random person approach you with like all those bullshits and you've heard it over and over again, and it's repeating and it never stops? So have you, I don't know, developed a kind of technique or like a kind of response that you always pull off that kind of helps you in those situations and gets you away at it in the most possible, nicest way that's possible?
Yeah, great question, actually. And I wish I had created a strategy for it. But what happens actually, just like the title of the show, Oh, I Love Brazilian Women, sometimes these attacks, these the things that we face don't always come as clear as that. So it might come even as a compliment, as something that sounds like a compliment, like,
it's
oh,
subtle.
I love Brazilian.
It's very subtle.
Yeah, exactly. So, oh, I love Brazilian women. Brazilian women. How am I gonna?
How do you respond?
How am I supposed to answer to that, right? Yeah. So I know there are many women that I admire, and that I'm sure they'd be, fast enough to give them an answer. But I know that sometimes for me, it's hard to just deal with that, and to have an answer for that. So of course, if something's more, it's less subtle than that. If something is said to me, I can argue, and I can respond to that. Maybe even ask, oh, so what do you mean with this that you said? And try to make the own person realize that this is stereotype, this is prejudice, this doesn't necessarily make sense. But it's not always the case, unfortunately. It doesn't come as clear as that.
Yeah, it's tough. I completely understand. I can imagine you can't be always that tough and hard and well prepared to like respond properly. So I can imagine usually like you had those like idiot. It was very subtle. You couldn't even like tell if it was like an insult or like a sexual comment. But afterwards, probably you find yourself asking, what did he mean? Like, what was that? Like I can completely understand it's completely awful and it shouldn't be this way. And yeah, so with what you're doing is actually the best we can do, educate society. And, unfortunately we see here in those like, the people that participate are mainly women. We should wish it were more men, like this is actually the target that should it be addressed to.
Yeah.
But yeah, by the way you're doing it, it's an amazing start. So yeah.
Thank you very much.
Good work.
Yeah, thank you. That's the goal. Thank you.
Sure.
And I think you did a really amazing job at also showing that one experience is not ubiquitous. So you really can't assume that one person's experience is going to be another's, and that the breadth is really wide. So if you have women of color and you have Indigenous women, you have trans women, you have, it's really a range from those sort of comments in a bar, like the questioner was just sort of mentioning, but then also to the, you know, murder of women and so forth, and trans women especially. So I think one thing that that the show really does well is to, like you said, to really show a breadth of the types of challenges that people face that sort of stem from this exotification and commodification. So yeah, thank you so much. If anybody else has a question, you can drop it in the chat or you can unmute yourself. And otherwise, I encourage everybody to go into the chat and click the links for the upcoming programs. We would love to see you there as well. And Luiza, thank you so much for everything and for telling us about the exhibition today.
Yes, of course. Thank you. And thank you everyone for attending. If you want to write a message in Portuguese, it's completely fine as well. I know I see many Brazilians here, and if someone doesn't feel comfortable writing in English, you can write in Portuguese. It's perfectly fine.
And the event coming up, Living as a Brazilian Woman Today, is going to be in Portuguese because it's going to be a conversation with many of the artists who are in the show. So okay, we have something just dropped in the chat. It says, the issue is not about women, how they dress, their ethnicity, race, Brazilian or not. It's often a problem that comes from patriarchy view of society, and some women's identities suffer more as racism, transphobia, and other discrimination values are added into the stereotypes.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. This is why I wanted to put this show together, and also this is why I said that I couldn't disagree more with people that in their comments say that, yeah, I mean, no wonder the stereotype exists if women are behaving like this or like that. For me, it's very clear that the problem is not how we behave, but actually how society sees us and expects us to behave. So yeah, and I agree that women of color, that trans women, and many other identities will suffer even more. They'll suffer, they'll face different layers of suffering. So yeah, I completely agree, Lottie. Thank you.
So that's it. We're going to wrap up here. And we just have a quick question. Would we get access to this recording? Yes, this has been recorded and it will go up on the exhibition website in the next couple of days. So check back there and you can share it with your friends and folks that missed it today. So again, thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your weekend.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.